Have you ever just felt completely swamped? I mean, by the sheer volume of words hitting you every single day. You've got emails piling up, social media feeds that just never end, articles screaming for your attention, conversations, podcasts like this one, audiobooks. It's just this constant deluge, isn't it? And sometimes, doesn't it feel like the more words there are flying around, the less clear things actually become? That constant noise can be genuinely exhausting. It leaves you feeling not more informed, but, I don't know, just more scattered. Well, today, we're embarking on a really fascinating deep dive. We're going into something that fundamentally challenges our everyday assumptions about communication, about language itself. We're going to explore Zen communication. It's a tradition, a perspective that suggests true, really profound understanding often lies way beyond words. It might be found in what seems like silence, or maybe a single unexpected shout, or even just a simple action. It's definitely about being truly well-informed, yeah, but in a way that radically respects your time and, crucially, cuts through all that overwhelming noise we were just talking about.
Think of it as maybe a shortcut to being well-informed, offering some pretty surprising facts and insights, and hopefully with just enough, interest to keep you hooked. Our exploration today, it's built on a really rich stack of sources. We've got insightful excerpts from titles like Zen Communication, Beyond Words to Direct Understanding, and Then Wisdom, Silence, Bare Speech, and True Understanding, and also Zen, The Art of Bare Speech. These texts, taken together, they offer a deeply cohesive look at how Zen masters approach communication. And often, it's in ways that feel incredibly counterintuitive almost, revolutionary, especially compared to our modern, very word-centric world. So here's the core question we're going to try and unpack today. What if the path to deeper, more authentic understanding isn't actually about more words, but maybe fewer? What if some of the most profound dialogues, the most transformative insights, happen not in these long, drawn-out conversations, but maybe in moments of quiet, or even profound silence? That's what we're here to explore. Okay, so let's unpack this right from the start. Because Zen, it really does challenge our conventional ideas about how communication is supposed to work. One of its most foundational principles, and you hear this one a lot, is that words are simply fingers pointing to the moon. They're not the moon itself. Now that sounds simple, but it's a pretty radical departure from how most of us operate day to day, isn't it? We often unconsciously act as if the words are the truth, as if they embody the reality itself. We assume if we can just articulate something perfectly, then we've truly grasped it.
It's a beautifully simple metaphor, isn't it? But incredibly profound when you really sit with it. We build our entire intellectual world, our whole way of understanding, on words. And it becomes so easy, almost automatic, to start treating those words as if they're the actual experience or the truth itself. Think of it like this. How often do we rely on a map, maybe a GPS navigation, as if it is the actual territory we're driving through?
Right, you focus so much on the screen, you miss the scenery.
Exactly. Zen gently nudges us, reminds us to remember that the territory, the reality, it's experienced directly, not just through its representation, its map, its description. This principle suggests words are tools, they're useful signposts designed to guide you towards understanding, but they are never, ever the understanding itself. Consider trying to describe, let's say, the taste of your absolute favorite food. Maybe something really complex, like a perfectly ripe mango or really amazing curry. You can use all the adjectives you want, right? Sweet, tangy, rich, spicy, aromatic. You can paint a really vivid picture with your language. But do those words, however eloquent, truly convey the actual experience of that flavor hitting your palate? That sensation?
No, not really. You have to taste it.
Precisely. The true taste is something felt. It's a direct sensation. It's not merely articulated. The words can only ever point towards that sensation. They can't possibly become it.
So it's like, words are the recipe, maybe, but they're definitely not the meal itself.
That's a great analogy.
You use the recipe to guide the cooking, but you don't sit down and eat the piece of paper.
Exactly. Or, like you said, a photograph of someone you love. It evokes feelings, memories, sure, but it's not the person. It's not their presence right there with you.
Okay, that makes sense. And if we accept that limitation...
Well, this realization, this acceptance, it creates what Zen traditions describe as an underlying distrust of words that might create discrepancies, or words that might lead one astray from the direct, unmediated truth. Now, distrust might sound a bit strong. It's not really hostility towards language. Language is essential, obviously. It's more a deep, abiding awareness of its inherent limitations, knowing what it can't do.
Which is so different from how we usually think.
Absolutely. It's a stark contrast to many Western philosophical and literary traditions, which often celebrate elaborate, eloquent language. We often see intricate phrasing or poetic beauty as the pinnacle of clarity or beauty, or even a sign of deeper truth. We tend to believe that the more eloquently something is expressed, the truer or more profound it must be.
We definitely value that. A great speech, a beautiful turn of phrase.
Right. But Zen pushes for a recognition that sometimes the more intricate the description, the more complex the language, the more room there actually is for misinterpretation. Or maybe for the listener to get completely caught up in the beauty or complexity of the words themselves, rather than the direct experience the words are trying, however imperfectly, to indicate.
So you get lost admiring the finger, and you forget all about the moon it's pointing at.
That's the essence of it. The emphasis shifts. Focus on the reality, the direct experience, not just the description of it.
That distinction is incredibly important. And it seems to lead directly into another core Zen concept, which you mentioned, the idea that words are merely a net of concepts and cannot grasp truth. When I hear net of concepts, I immediately picture like trying to catch flowing water, maybe a river with a fishing net. You might scoop up a few drops, maybe catch a few fish swimming in it, but you absolutely don't capture the whole continuous flow of the river itself, do you?
That's a very, very apt image, and it's one that resonates strongly with how Zen masters talk about language. This idea contrasts so sharply with our conventional reliance on language to define everything, to categorize it, label it, and intellectually grasp reality. We use words to put everything into neat little boxes, we name things, classify them, and we genuinely believe that by doing so, we're truly understanding them, maybe even mastering them in some way.
Yeah, that feels right. That's how we organize the world.
It is. But Zen implies that these conceptual frameworks, these nets of words and labels, while they're undeniably useful for organization, for building societies, for everyday communication, they can actually trap us. They can obscure the direct, unmediated experience of truth. The net captures aspects. Yes, those individual drops, those specific fish, like in your analogy, but it can't capture the whole flowing, interconnected reality of a phenomenon. Reality is too fluid for the net.
Wow. Okay, so if we're constantly trying to put everything into words, constantly trying to categorize and define, are we actually, without realizing it, putting up invisible barriers to truly seeing things just as they are, without all the labels and judgments attached? Are we, in our very attempt to understand through language, inadvertently limiting our own perception?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? And it's precisely what Zen invites us to consider. Are we defining reality with our words, or are our definitions actually limiting our perception of it? Zen strongly suggests the latter is often the case. Think about a really big concept, like love, for instance.
Okay.
We have countless definitions, right? We have poems, songs, philosophical treatises, psychological theories, all trying to capture what love is.
Thousands of years of trying.
Exactly. But does any single word, or even any combination of words, truly encapsulate the feeling of love, the lived reality of it, and all its messy, glorious, sometimes contradictory complexity for every single individual?
Probably not. It feels different for everyone, and even different from moment to moment.
Precisely. Zen would suggest that while these words are absolutely essential for communicating about love, for sharing experiences, they can also become that net, a net that restricts our direct, unmediated experience. We might start arguing over the definitions of love, getting caught up in the concepts, and sometimes losing sight of the fluid, multifaceted, ultimately ungraspable experience itself.
So we debate the map instead of exploring the territory.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's about not mistaking the conceptual framework, the net, the map, the recipe for the living experience. The net is undeniably useful for catching fish, absolutely. But you would never confuse the few fish squirming in the net for the vast, boundless ocean itself.
That's a really powerful distinction. It really does make you pause and think about how much we intellectualize, how much we verbalize, pretty much everything. So if words are limited in this way, if they're just pointers or nets, what does Zen offer beyond them? It sounds like it proposes some incredibly unique paths to get to that direct understanding. The principle of furyū monji, which you said translates roughly to not based on written words, that immediately jumps out at me. This is fascinating because it seems to fundamentally challenge our entire academic world, our whole system of education, which relies so heavily on texts, on scriptures, on extensive verbal discourse. So here's where it gets really interesting for me. Are we, in our constant pursuit of knowledge through reading endless books and attending lectures, somehow missing the very essence of understanding that Zen seems to be pointing towards?
That's a fantastic observation, and it hits right at the heart of it. Because it's not that words or texts are considered useless in Zen, not at all. But they are seen as a means, not the end in themselves. The furyū monji principle emphasizes that ultimate truth, deep realization, is found through direct insight, through a personal, lived realization, not solely through intellectual analysis of texts or by mastering verbal descriptions.
Okay.
And yes, this really does challenge the very foundations of many academic and intellectual traditions that rely so heavily, almost exclusively sometimes, on extensive verbal or written discourse for acquiring knowledge. Zen puts the emphasis elsewhere. It's about knowing something deep down in your bones, in your very being, a kind of deep embodied understanding. It's different from just knowing about something intellectually.
Knowing about versus just knowing.
Exactly. Direct experience becomes the primary teacher. That aha moment, that flash of genuine insight, it isn't typically found by parsing the perfect sentence in a text or memorizing a complex definition. It's more likely to arrive as a direct flash of understanding, a sudden clarity. Now, that flash might be sparked by reading a sentence or hearing a talk, absolutely. But the insight itself ultimately transcends the words that triggered it.
So you use the pointer.
You use the pointer, the words, the books, the lectures to get yourself oriented, to move you towards the direct insight. But you don't dwell on the pointer itself. You don't mistake it for the moon. You have to eventually look beyond it, towards what it's indicating.
That's a huge shift in perspective from our typical approach to learning, isn't it? Which is usually about accumulating more and more pointers, more information. And this seems to lead us naturally to something else truly profound, that Zen masters emphasize: the value of silence. You mentioned they consider silence as a complete language. It's not just the absence of sound, is it? It's described in the sources as not nothingness, but space and depth. I find this idea incredibly compelling, maybe because our world feels so incredibly noisy all the time.
Precisely. And this principle, it directly counters that relentless modern societal pressure we all feel. The pressure to constantly articulate, to put everything into words, to fill every single moment with sound, with chatter.
Oh yeah, that pressure is real.
It is. We feel it in almost every aspect of our lives, don't we? From professional meetings where silence can feel awkward or unproductive.
Definitely. Someone always jumps in to fill it.
Right. To personal relationships where we sometimes think we must constantly engage in conversation to show we're connected. And of course, the pervasive demands of social media, urging us to comment, react, share, always with words. But Zen suggests that true understanding, and perhaps even genuine connection, can often be found and maybe even flourish more readily in a nonverbal atmosphere, in a shared presence.
An atmosphere, I like that.
Silence creates room. It's not emptiness, it's a fertile space. Space for deeper awareness, for a different kind of connection to arise. It's a space where truths can emerge quietly without the constant interference of conceptual noise, without that frantic need we often feel to fill every moment with speech. It allows for a different kind of listening, a listening with more than just our ears.
So all that constant chatter we feel almost obligated to engage in, whether it's scrolling and commenting online, or even just feeling the need to talk constantly in our daily conversations, Zen suggests we might actually be missing out on something far deeper. That by always filling the air with words, we might actually be less connected in a way. It feels like we're maybe sacrificing depth for sheer volume.
I think that's a very insightful way to put it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really about discerning what's truly meaningful in our interactions. Are we genuinely communicating, establishing real understanding, or are we just making noise? Are we connecting on a deeper level, or just exchanging information on the surface? Silence offers that crucial chance to listen, not just with our ears, passively hearing sounds, but listening with our whole being, actively attending to what's present beyond the words.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think of those moments, maybe rare moments, of profound connection you might have experienced with a very close friend or a loved one, where no words were actually needed. Maybe just a shared glance across a room, or sitting together in comfortable silence. Just a palpable sense of empathy and understanding passing between you.
Yeah, I know those moments. They're powerful.
They are. Or consider the incredible understanding that can pass between musicians who are really improvising well together. Their instruments seem to speak a language that goes beyond the individual notes. The pauses, the shared breathing, the intuitive responses they create, this amazing synergy, that atmosphere, that presence, that's the language Zen is pointing towards. It's often in those silent or less wordy spaces that true understanding can blossom, free from the filters and inherent limitations of spoken language. It allows the truth of the moment, the connection, to simply be felt directly.
That's incredibly insightful. And then taking it even further beyond just silence, Zen traditions often communicate not just through quiet, but through these very direct, sometimes startling methods, like shouts, which I learned are called ikatsu, and even through simple, sometimes symbolic actions. This seems to radically challenge that conventional notion that more words, more explanation always leads to better understanding. Honestly, it almost sounds like a kind of shock therapy for the mind, something designed to push you right out of your usual comfortable thinking patterns. It makes me wonder, how does this kind of direct nonverbal approach work with something like a koan, for example, which is such a key, though often puzzling, Zen practice?
You're absolutely right to use that phrase, shock therapy for the mind. It captures something essential about it, and it's very intentional. The goal in these instances isn't primarily to be polite or gentle or verbose. The goal is to be direct, immediate, and utterly effective in cutting through mental fog. It's about trying to wake up something within you, some deeper understanding that intellectual explanation simply cannot reach. It's not about just feeding you more information through a conventional logical pathway.
Okay, so it's bypassing the usual channels.
Exactly. These nonverbal cues, like a specific gesture or even these shocking interjections, like the yukatsu, they are designed precisely to bypass the intellectual, analytical mind, the part of us that constantly wants to categorize and explain. They are meant to be direct, unmediated expressions. Their purpose is to cut through all that mental clutter, all the conceptual overlay, and bring about an immediate, intuitive understanding. And ikatsu, for instance, that sudden, powerful shout from a Zen master, it isn't typically an expression of anger or frustration, though it might sound like it. It's a calculated intervention. It's a sudden jolt, almost like a clap of thunder, meant to snap you right out of your ordinary conceptual framework, your usual train of thought, and pull you forcefully into a moment of pure, unfiltered awareness. It forces you to be absolutely present, right here, right now, to confront reality directly, without the usual mediating filter of your thoughts and labels and interpretations.
So it's really about disrupting the habitual pattern of the mind, creating a sudden space, an opening for something new to emerge, not through careful explanation or logical progression, but through a direct experience, a kind of jolt into pure presence.
Exactly. It's about achieving a direct impact that bypasses the usual, often circular thought processes. It's not about building a bridge of words, it's about creating an immediate opening. And these unconventional conveyances, this emphasis on directness, leads us straight into understanding the unique purpose and the power of what Zen calls bare speech.
And what's really striking about this Zen approach to language, this bare speech idea in particular, is that the sources say masters are explicitly not trying to make their words resonate in the usual sense, or be particularly poetic. In fact, their communication is often described as, well, unfriendly and short, and decidedly not poetic at all. Now, my instinct, probably like most people's, if I'm trying to deliver a truly impactful message, is often the opposite. It's to craft beautiful, inspiring words, maybe use metaphors, make them sing, really try to evoke emotion. But Zen seems to be saying, hold on a minute, maybe that's not the most effective way, or at least not the only way.
It's a profound counter-instinct for many of us, absolutely. And what's fascinating here, according to these texts, is that the kind of impact Zen seeks isn't necessarily an emotional resonance that comes from eloquent phrasing. It's aiming for a direct, unvarnished insight, a sudden seeing. This is because the fundamental intent is not to impress the listener, or to persuade them through elegance, or even to entertain them. The intent is simply to convey truth, or point towards it as efficiently and directly as possible, without any unnecessary embellishment.
And stripping it right down.
Exactly. It's all about clarity and directness. It involves stripping away anything that might potentially distract from the core insight being offered. The focus is purely on the function of the words, do they point effectively, rather than on their aesthetic qualities. And yes, this stands in stark contrast to many Western philosophical or poetic traditions, which often use beautiful expressions, intricate arguments, or evocative imagery to try and grasp and articulate the world. In those traditions, the very beauty or complexity of the language is often seen as integral to the depth of the understanding conveyed.
Right, the medium is part of the message.
In a sense, yes. But Zen, through this bare speech, seems to move towards demonstrating the limits of words, precisely by using them sparingly, often bluntly, and without adornment. The underlying aim seems to be to bypass those brain loops that beautiful or complex words might inadvertently create, the loops of intellectual appreciation, or critical analysis of the phrasing, or emotional reaction to the words, rather than a direct encounter with the underlying reality. It's about getting straight to the heart of the matter, no detours.
That's a really tough concept to grapple with, I think, because we are so conditioned to value eloquence, aren't we? To believe that a more articulate explanation is always somehow a better or deeper one. So if we strip away all the embellishment, all the poetic resonance, all the comforting explanations, what's left? Zen emphasizes knowing the limits of words, as we've discussed. and seems to firmly believe that truth resides in the minimum necessary words, and even more radically that the deepest dialogue exists in silence. It really makes me think about how much we tend to over-explain things in our daily lives, in emails, in meetings, even in personal conversations, often probably with diminishing returns. So what does this minimum necessary words approach really mean for how we could potentially communicate?
Well, it suggests something quite radical, that we might actually be able to achieve deeper understanding, both in conveying and receiving, by actively listening for what's not being said, by paying close attention to the space between the words, to the pauses, to the underlying feeling or presence, and also by learning to say less ourselves.
Saying less, that's hard.
It is. It requires trusting that the essential truth, the core message, can actually come through without needing layers and layers of excessive explanation or justification. This directly contradicts that conventional, almost default belief that detailed and extensive explanations are always superior for achieving clear communication and fostering deep connection. For Zen, this economy of language isn't just about being brief, it's seen as a profound virtue, because it forces both the speaker and the listener to confront the essence of the matter directly, without getting lost in unnecessary conceptual baggage or decorative phrasing.
So the idea is, if a single well-chosen word, or maybe a simple gesture, or even a moment of shared profound silence can convey the truth, then why on earth would you use more? Why dilute it?
Exactly. Think about a truly profound piece of art, maybe a minimalist sculpture or an abstract painting with just a few brushstrokes. It can communicate volumes, can't it? It can evoke deep emotions, spark complex insights, all without using a single word. Or consider how, in a moment of real crisis or urgency, a simple, direct instruction like yelling "duck" or "look out" is far more effective and conveys more immediate, vital understanding than launching into a lengthy explanation of the impending danger.
Right, you don't need a paragraph when a word will save you.
Precisely. It's about cutting right to the absolute core of the message, ruthlessly removing anything that isn't utterly essential to pointing towards the truth of that moment.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that sometimes, maybe often, less really is more, especially when it comes to aiming for profound understanding, not just surface information. And this focus on directness, on bypassing intellectual clutter, brings us squarely to some of the most distinct and, let's be honest, often perplexing practices associated with Zen, koans, and ikatsu. You mentioned earlier they're designed to engage our whole being, not just our intellect. We touched on koans briefly. So just to reiterate, these aren't just clever brain teasers designed to make you think really hard, are they? They're specifically designed to kind of shake you awake, to push you beyond your typical patterns of thought.
Precisely. And this really raises an important question for all of us, I think. How often do we try to just think our way into understanding something truly deep or complex, when maybe, just maybe, true insight needs to come from a completely different place altogether, a place beyond pure intellect, beyond logic? Zen koans, which interestingly are often referred to literally as public cases, like legal precedents almost, setting a standard for realization. They are definitely not riddles meant to be solved intellectually. You can't crack them with cleverness or logical deduction. Instead, they're typically paradoxical statements or deeply unsettling questions. Often they seem nonsensical to the rational mind. Take the most classic example, the one everyone's heard. What is the sound of one hand clapping?
Right, the ultimate unanswerable question.
Well, it's unanswerable by the intellect. That's the point. This isn't a question you can answer by reciting historical facts or philosophical theories, or even by listening really, really intently with your ears. It's designed, quite deliberately, to bring your shattering, analytical, intellectual mind to a screeching halt, to exhaust your conventional thought processes, to show you their limits. The shock therapy aspect we talked about earlier isn't necessarily about being overtly harsh. It's more about the profound jolt of realizing that your usual mental frameworks, the ones you rely on for everything else, are utterly insufficient to grasp this particular truth.
So it forces you out of your comfort zone.
Completely. It forces a practitioner to engage their intuition, their lived experience, their entire bodily awareness, their whole being, to find a response. And notice they say response, not answer. A response that utterly transcends conventional logic and linear thinking. It's aiming for a deep, intuitive grasp of reality, an experience of direct seeing that bypasses the need for verbal explanation or conceptual understanding. It's meant to awaken a deeper, non-conceptual intelligence that Zen believes resides within all of us. Koans don't offer easy answers. They're designed to push you right off that comfortable intellectual cliff in the hope that you might discover you can actually fly, metaphorically speaking.
Okay, so the goal is definitely to bypass our usual intellectual filters, our conceptual nets, and access a more direct, intuitive kind of understanding. It sounds almost like a mental shortcut in a way, but an incredibly intense and demanding one. How exactly do those sudden shouts, the ikatsu, fit into this? How do they achieve that bypassing effect? Is it purely about the shock value, startling us into immediate mindfulness, or is there maybe a deeper physiological or psychological effect believed to be at play?
That's a great question, and based on the sources, it seems to be a bit of both. The ikatsu, these sudden, powerful, often explosive vocalizations, they function very similarly to koans in their core purpose. They serve as a direct, almost visceral form of that shock therapy-like communication, aimed squarely at cutting off those habitual brain loops. It's crucial to remember, as we discussed, these are generally not seen as spontaneous expressions of anger or frustration by the master. They're intentional, highly disciplined interventions, calculated moments.
Right, a technique.
A technique, yes, designed specifically to bypass intellectual analysis and foster immediate, intuitive understanding. Imagine you're deep in thought, maybe really grappling with a complex philosophical problem, or perhaps just lost in a daydream, or even caught up in a repetitive cycle of worry or anxiety.
Okay.
And then, completely unexpectedly, a sudden, sharp, incredibly loud sound, the ikatsu, cuts right through it all, like lightning splitting the air. What happens in that instant? It pulls you immediately and forcefully right into the present moment, doesn't it? It clears away, even just for a second, all that mental chatter, all that conceptual overlay that might be obscuring a direct insight.
Yeah, it would definitely get your attention, stop you in your tracks.
Exactly. It's like pressing a sudden, hard reset button on the mind's ongoing narrative. It's about creating a direct opening, a clearing in the mental clouds, rather than trying to painstakingly build a pathway of words or concepts towards understanding. It's an immediate, non-negotiable invitation to see things just as they are, right here, right now, without the usual distorting filter of our thoughts, our concepts, our labels, our language. It's a jolt back to raw, unmediated awareness.
Wow. It certainly sounds like a very intense, very direct way to communicate. So the emphasis is overwhelmingly not on explaining things, but on triggering an experience, a direct shift in perception, a transmission that happens beyond, or even in spite of words. This makes me profoundly wonder about Zen's relevance, maybe even its necessity, in our incredibly noisy, word-saturated modern world. How can these ancient principles, developed in monasteries centuries ago, possibly help us navigate what honestly feels like a constant, overwhelming flood of information today?
You know, I think it's incredibly relevant, perhaps paradoxically, even more relevant now than ever before, precisely because of that information flood. And it really does raise an important, maybe uncomfortable question for all of us living in this digital age. In this era of constant input, endless streams of data, are we truly absorbing and understanding anything deeply? Or are we just skimming the surface, endlessly distracted, jumping from one notification to the next?
That is home.
Zen, through these principles we've been discussing, offers some profound guidance, I believe, to reclaim oneself from the flood of information. Its core tenets directly challenge our contemporary, almost compulsive reliance on constant verbal input and output. Think about it. Endless news cycles demanding our attention, opinion pieces flying from every direction, the relentless hum of social media feeds that constantly pressure us not just to consume, but also to react, to comment, to produce more words.
Yeah, the pressure to have an opinion and share it is immense.
It really is. We are perpetually pressured to consume and produce words. And Zen suggests that this constant verbal exchange, while it seems like it's connecting us, keeping us informed, it can actually lead to a profound kind of superficiality. It can ironically disconnect us from deeper truths, from genuine insights, maybe even from our own authentic selves, hidden beneath all the noise.
It resonates so deeply, doesn't it? That feeling of being constantly overwhelmed. Not just by the volume of information, but by the sheer number of words, by the incessant need to articulate everything, to respond to everything, to keep up, to consume more and more. It can leave us feeling completely scattered, utterly exhausted, and oddly enough, sometimes less truly informed or genuinely connected than when we started scrolling or clicking. It feels like we're drowning in information, yet somehow thirsting for actual understanding.
Absolutely. That's a perfect description of the modern paradox. And Zen gently but firmly reminds us that there's a real cost to this constant verbal engagement, especially if it's not balanced with periods of quiet, of stillness, of reflection. And this is precisely where that practice of deliberately retreating into silence comes back into play, not as an escape necessarily, but as such a powerful, potentially transformative tool for navigating our world. Zen suggests that consciously, deliberately retreating into silence, even for short periods, can foster a much deeper kind of connection, both with others and perhaps most importantly, with oneself, moving far beyond the often shallow connections forged through constant verbal exchange.
How does silence foster connection? That seems counterintuitive, too.
By consciously embracing silence, by allowing moments of quiet, we create space. Not just empty quiet, but space for a genuine connection that is found more readily in that nonverbal atmosphere or presence we talked about. This allows for a deeper level of understanding to potentially emerge, one that isn't entirely dependent on perfectly articulated words, but relies more on shared experience, on unspoken empathy, on an intuitive grasp of the other person or the situation. Silence, looked at this way, isn't an absence at all. It becomes a source of profound richness and depth. It becomes like the fertile soil, the quiet canvas upon which true insights and genuine connections can emerge, unencumbered by the constant noise and distraction of verbal input. The powerful, distilled message from Zen coming through loud and clear from these sources seems to be this. Words are convenient. They are undeniably useful tools, but they are certainly not omnipotent. They can't do everything. And perhaps, just perhaps, the deepest dialogue truly exists in silence.
Wow. We've really taken a deep dive today, haven't we? Into Zen's fascinating and often quite counterintuitive approach to communication. We've really challenged the very bedrock of how we often think about words, starting with that core idea that words are just fingers pointing to the moon, not the moon itself. We recognize language as that net of concepts that, while useful, can't fully capture ultimate truth or flowing reality. We explored how Zen intentionally moves beyond words by placing such a strong emphasis on direct insight, on personal realization. We talked about the profound power of silence, not as emptiness, but as a complete language filled with space and depth. And we touched on how Zen aims to engage our whole being, not just our intellect, through unique, sometimes startling practices like koans, those paradoxical questions, and ikatsu, those sudden shouts designed to jolt us directly into awareness. Zen teaches us the surprising importance of bare speech, suggesting that truth often resides in the minimum necessary words, and it constantly reminds us of the profound depth that can be found when we truly understand and respect the inherent limits of language. So, as you go about your day now, maybe heading back into that world filled with countless words hitting you from your emails, your screens, your conversations, maybe just consider this for a moment. What if the most important message you could possibly receive today, or maybe the most crucial thing you need to convey to someone else, isn't actually spoken aloud at all? What profound insights might you gain? Or what truly deep connections might you be able to forge if you consciously, deliberately allowed for a little more silence in your interactions, a little more direct presence? What might happen if you trusted the understanding that can emerge when that conceptual net of words is momentarily, intentionally set aside? What parts of yourself, what depth of experience might you reclaim from that ceaseless flood of information if you started seeking depth over sheer volume and maybe value genuine meaning over just more endless noise?